Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 39. Can you believe it? 39 from Creative Collaborations Conversations with Veronica and Jillian. Hello, Jillian. How are you
Hi
today?
there. Hello. I am well. Still well. I'm still me. And 3-9. Here we
39.
go. Yep.
I do remember when I turned 39 and I was getting scared. But I have to say, when you're recording an episode, actually that sounds better.
Hmm. Yes.
So, here, complete honesty with our listeners. We always sit down before we record episodes, actually 1 week or 2 weeks before, and we make a plan. What should we
Hmm.
discuss?
Hmm.
Yeah, we had a free episode a couple of weeks ago. I don't even remember when. And we actually had so much fun, and we said, let's
Hmm.
do one again. So here it is, us with a new freestyle episode in which I
Hmm.
do have my coffee. Do you have your coffee or tea?
I don't. I'm on water now because I'm
Okay.
trying to be better about the volume of coffee that I'm consuming. So I'm going with my
Maybe I
water.
should do. I'm still
But
with my morning coffee.
I'm doing pretty well with the water situation, the water
Well
consumption. I've
done.
got a large, I don't know if we call that, yeah, a large bottle. It's not a jug. It's a large bottle. So
No,
yeah,
the
I'm
jug
trying
is
to.
the different one. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so a freestyle episode. And for me, what it makes me think of immediately, and I probably talk about this all the time, but is when we first met for coffee that time at the little shop, Coffee and Coconuts in
Yeah.
Amsterdam.
In
And
the
we just
pipe.
sat down and talked and just kind of compared notes and just chatted, like,
Hmm.
talk shop and got to know each other. And so when you asked me to do a podcast, it seemed like that was one of the things we talked about, is like what a great opportunity for us to continue to get to know each other and to continue having these types of conversations. And here we are, 39 episodes into this, and just about every episode we had a predetermined topic and had a structured conversation. So it's kind of nice to be able to come full circle in a way and have just a very organic conversation.
Yeah.
Granted,
And
we're doing it this way, just like we're in a coffee shop, but now like more people are listening as opposed to the coffee shop where,
that puts
maybe
a
they
little
are,
bit
maybe
of
they're not.
pressure on.
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
But I do want to thank you for being flexible because I do know that's a little bit out of your comfort zone. You're very organized and structured, and I love that. And that makes it very easy to work with you because you know exactly what to expect and when, and
Mm,
like what's the procedure, right? What's the process?
yeah.
So thank you for being flexible because I am a little bit more like this when it comes to
Mm,
stuff like
mm,
recording and talks and um yeah, and especially now that we are in the summer or Dutch
mm-hmm,
summer, that you have 1 week of summer and yes, summer, and then you
mm-hmm.
have 1 week of autumn, and then maybe a half a day of summer.
I know, I know.
And everyone is thinking, or everyone is on holiday, or like half of the people I know are on holiday, and half of the people I know are sick. And you're like, what's
Mm.
happening here?
Yes, yeah. Yeah. No, I
Your
actually
mind.
love you talking about the flexibility versus the structure, because for me, it's kind of a nod to yeah, my wife actually, who's very spontaneous, and her culture is much more spontaneous than, I don't know if it's my culture or just me personally. So it's been an ongoing conversation for 10 years about the spontaneity piece and how I tend to be very, yeah, structured and organized and, yeah, methodical about things and whatnot. And so trying to be a little bit, yeah, she would say more fun, but I would say more flexible. So I feel
Well,
like,
you
look
can
at
be
me.
funny
Woo,
when
look
it's
at me. Yeah. Look at me
that's
being flexible.
but it's a very good point because everybody knows I'm Romanian, or if you don't know by now, yes, I'm Romanian. So we are quite spontaneous. Of course, business-wise, you do structure things and you have a planning, but as a culture, we are quite spontaneous, and it was a big
Mm,
shock here, for example, with the agendas and planning. And I do like planning. So now I'm much more relaxed, actually, funny enough. But back home, I was the one always with the plan and backup plan and
mm,
like
yeah.
that. So,
Yeah.
and then that doesn't mean you can't have flexibility and spontaneity. And for me, that will be like pick up the phone and call a friend. Hey, how about we go for a pizza tonight because it's a nice weather? And
Mm,
that you can really do here in the Netherlands with a lot of people if they're not internationals.
mm,
But also international. That's not true, actually. It's not true because you can do it with some Dutch people. But as a culture, as a rule, you don't really do
yeah,
that. You are
yeah.
much more structured and plan, and you have an
Mm-hmm.
agenda, and you are like very mature, let's say. But that actually makes me wonder now. Have you seen that reflected? Actually, I did, me personally, I did see that, but I'm curious of your experience. Did you see that reflected in the business? In terms of how people do business, do they, the decision-making process until the moment you start having a chat about working with them and sending a proposal, having a closing, a follow-up call, closing, and actually start working with them. How is that here compared to the States, for example?
Hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. Wow. Boy. So a few things come to mind, and I'm going to do my best to actually answer your question as well. Okay, so all right. So just to knock the top one off the list quickly, because it's like the biggest one, is there are many differences that I notice and experience between the kind of American, it's like culture, business culture versus here. There's just many how things work. Um, and one example that yeah, it's still my sample size is they're not equal, right? Because I have 25 years almost of business experience in the US and just call it 2 years business experience here in the Netherlands. So it's certainly not and I'm not like a cultural expert or any of these things, just what I have observed. Um, so it seems like, or at least I have seen, yeah, I'm trying to be very diplomatic here, but let me just come out with it, that there seems to be less commitment on things, or less, the way commitment is demonstrated here is a bit different than what I'm accustomed to. And another way of perhaps looking at that or explaining that is the, again, the culture of work in the US is like you work until the job is done. Nope, you work until it's the best. Nope, you work until you're number one. Like it's like this insatiable quest, like
Mm,
true hamster on the wheel thing. Like
yeah,
it's just
never is
this. It
enough
keeps
kind of
going.
a thing.
Yeah, and it's just how it is. Whereas here, it's a lot more tempered or subdued. It's still there, and it's not to say people aren't ambitious or anything like that. But it also seems like, yeah, if they just cancel an event or just cancel something, or yeah, whatever, it's not a big deal. It's just, yeah, that's it. I mean, oh, it's sunny out, or like whatever. So it's a bit different. It feels a little bit less secure to me here than what I'm accustomed to. So I'm just trying to, so I think it to me, it's like, oh, look at this. There's another growth opportunity here. Can learn to be even more flexible. Yeah. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's just one, but there's
Yeah.
many other examples about it. So there's some of that. Um, and then another thing that came to mind, and again, I might be losing the thread of your actual question, but it came to mind and I feel like it's related to this conversation, is the way, working with US clients, over the past decade plus, the way I would handle or treat flexibility was in a very proactive way, I would treat flexibility in a structured way. How do you like that? So, and the
That's
way
so
that,
you.
yeah, yeah, right. The way I would do it is this is part of the reason that we built a retainer model, because I would say to clients always, we've got this, like, here's a stable of things we're going to provide, but we're going to create some space because business and life happens in real time. And there are going to be things that you expect are going to happen that are not going to materialize. And conversely, there are going to be opportunities that fall into your lap or that emerge that you were not expecting. And so
Mhm.
by having a retainer model, it will allow us to be very nimble and flexible and to adjust on the fly without having to stop and go back and create a new proposal, a change order, and go through that whole thing all over again.
Yeah,
So we're very deliberate about incorporating some space for flexibility to happen inside of a long-term structured contract.
makes perfect sense. Actually, I can, hearing you saying that, what came to my mind was in Europe, they will expect that, but not pay a retainer necessarily. So they will try,
Hmm.
and especially in my culture, I did work with a lot of nationalities. They will, is that, so I'm not talking about Dutch people here, but that will apply to a specific level to them as well, will be to try to get the most out of your contract and even a little bit extra on
Hmm.
top of it.
Hmm.
And I would actually try to deliver that as well. So will be kind of expected in one
Hmm.
way. But you do need to see until when, was that balance, where do
Hmm.
I stop? But
Hmm.
the retainer makes perfect sense for that. And we were talking, was it last episode or when we were talking about the marketing accelerator, and you asked me how
Hmm.
we started, and I said we started with the service called Marketing Body, where I said you have access to me nonstop. And how
Yeah.
do you define that? Because
Hmm.
that's when I say that, I don't actually literally expect you to reach out to me nonstop, but some people do. So
Right.
how do you do that? And you're thinking about we're going to apply common sense, but that actually
You
differs.
can't. No, you
Yeah,
need to know the rules of engagement.
exactly. That was
Yes.
a big mistake from my side and a big
Mm.
learning curve, because I was applying everything through my filter,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
so that's very this why the retainer thing speaks to me and makes perfect sense, because
Hmm.
we do have clients paying a monthly retainer, but with very clear activities in that monthly retainer.
Hmm.
So it's not,
Yeah. Yes.
like,
Yeah. It's tricky to figure out how to structure it so that there's
Mhm.
room to breathe, and also um, making sure there isn't scope creep as well.
Yeah.
So making sure the client is getting their value. And so a couple things. So one way that I would handle that is to tell them when, opportunity X emerged and there's like something that we could do, depending on what else was going on. I could then communicate to them, this is really great. If we jump on this now, we might need to reshuffle some of the other things. So project, you know, V over here, we're just going to have to push that further out. We'll go to the next quarter. Does that sound fine? So we can allocate resources here. And so usually be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And to be honest, most of the time they had no awareness about all these things because we were managing the process for these things. So
Yeah.
that's an added part. So that's, yeah, so that's part of it. Just be very transparent and communicative about that and let them know what this meant and allow them to make the decision. Yes, let's do that. Or you know what, let's not. Or this is actually more important or, whatever. So we
Yeah,
just
just to
communicate
split
about
and
that.
arrange. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But that also reminds me of another conversation I've been having recently. I have the Sustainable Growth Program, and there's some business owners in this program, and they're having very similar experiences, believe it or not. Because, yeah, it's like this is what it is, having a business
Sure.
and trying to grow a business. But specifically in terms of the retainer, both of them have retainers, but the conversation I've been having with them is to really encouraging them to reevaluate. Um, it's like look at what they think the retainer is, and then look at what the client thinks it is, and what is the client valuing, and then look for, which is the part that I've helped with, the things that they're actually delivering or providing that are not on their list.
That's a good
And
point. That's a very good point, because
yeah,
we
and
are
that,
always delivering
yes,
more or different
yes,
things that
yes,
actually they bring a lot of value and we are not even aware. So that's a very
yes.
good point.
So we've been doing that. And just by doing that, it begins to shift the perspective slightly on what they're actually doing.
And how
and
to
then being
structure
able
the
to
service, actually.
correct, and including the client communications and the strategy and all of that kind of stuff. And then aligning that better with what did the client actually ask for initially, or what did they need? What are they getting value from? So looking at that kind of that stack and then aligning those two pieces. And usually then this, in my experience with them, they then realize or feel more comfortable that they can in fact double their prices. And so that's what we've been doing. Because if you just say, oh, double your prices, they're like, ah, but it's
Why
this and
would I
this,
do that?
ah, yeah, whatever.
It
But
makes
it's like,
perfect sense
oh,
now. I would be
yeah,
the same. Like when I
yeah,
hear that, like, why would I do that? But if
yeah.
you're structuring how you're delivering and what you're delivering,
Hmm.
yeah,
So I
makes
think
perfect
that's
sense.
an example of like a flexibility within structure, kind of another example.
Well, I would define that actually not as a creativity and providing a different perspective.
Hmm.
And this one actually is very important sometimes. And we both we did it for ourselves actually to get someone from outside. Um, and I'm not trying to pitch any companies here. I'm just pointing something because we are so stuck in what we are doing that it's
Yes.
very hard to how is that saying? It's very hard to see the forest from the trees
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you just
Through
see
the
one.
trees. Yeah. Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
impossible
Through the trees, from the trees,
from the
through the
trees.
trees, through the trees.
How is it now? I want to Google it.
I think it's through the trees.
I
Yeah. I think
probably.
so. Yeah. Who knows? We can just say
Like,
see the forest, and then we know what it means, even though if we don't
somebody
know what it
somebody
is.
please send us a
Yeah.
message what's the
Save
correct
us.
one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, that being said, I have to say I do enjoy. It can be a pain in the ass sometimes working with different nationalities, and especially from the expectation point of view. And if you
Hmm.
don't really understand the culture, or you're new, and it's one more thing because we are talking about culture, but a Spanish person that lives in the Netherlands is different from a Spanish person living in Spain. An American living
Yes.
here is different from an American in the States. A Romanian is the same because we are
Yes.
changing. And we keep on
Yes.
talking about that. So we
Yes.
are a hybrid. We are something in between because of
Mm-hmm.
course you can't really eliminate your culture. It's
Yeah.
trained
It's
in your blood, in your way of thinking, and then you adapt it and you took what resonated with you from the new culture and you created something. So that
yes.
actually makes it even harder
I
because
think so.
you are
It,
like
person to person, company to
situation
company,
to
there's
situation. Yeah.
yeah, how communication happens, what the expectations are, what's reasonable, what's the right way, what's
This might
successful, what's like all of these
acceptable.
things. Yeah, exactly. It's
And
yeah, it
it
can be like landmines almost. Like, oh, I didn't mean to, I didn't know. It's really tricky, but I think it as this happens more and there's more and more people that are multicultural themselves and multicultural, yeah,
environment.
households, environments, companies, etc. I think it really elevates the need for yeah, like humility and transparency and uh like empathy and self-awareness and all of these things that are like soft skills that were like, oh, that sounds really nice and kind of woo-woo, but I think it becomes quite paramount if you want to have a successful, sustainable company. Now I really think it's important to be, have awareness around this stuff because it's unavoidable now,
How I
I
treat it
think.
is actually asking questions. And I do
Mm,
know asking sometimes the stupid questions or very obvious question. People say like,
mhm.
you don't know this, or why are you asking this? Or look stupid. But actually the basic questions you are asking, for example, what do you understand? What do you mean by that particular thing? That can mean anything, or it's a very
Mhm,
simple
mhm.
question. Like I'm targeting scale ups or startups, for example. When we did the
Right,
best conference, I was asking every single person I met, what do you understand by a startup and a scale up?
right, right,
And
right.
everyone will understand different things. And everyone, I'm like, what do you mean? Of course I know. But actually, people are using terms. They have an idea of what it means, but they
Mhm,
have no clue what it really means, or they
mhm.
have their own understanding. So
Yes.
how I treat all this situation is actually by asking basic questions and making sure are we discussing about the same things and do we have the same understanding of what we are
Mm-hmm.
discussing?
Mm-hmm.
It's basically setting up the framework and the environment. We are making sure we are discussing, we are talking the same language, if you want.
Right.
And then it
Right.
makes it easier to create the rules or procedure or how whatever you
Mm-hmm.
want to create
Mm-hmm.
or however you want to call them, because we have an understanding. And what
Mm-hmm.
the fact being an expat or international, however you want to call it, taught me is actually to not to be afraid to ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
Something that honestly back home you wouldn't really ask because people, what do you mean? You don't know what that
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and now
And
looking back is like, that's so
right.
basic. Let's just ask
Yeah.
questions. Why are we so afraid?
Yeah. It's an excellent point. It's a really excellent point. I think, yeah, it made me think of related to the culture piece is the language piece.
Yes.
And so that for me has been pretty significant, kind of, yeah, reckoning or very humbling and also very frustrating. Because generally speaking, globally, people know Americans speak English,
Mhm.
you know, and so now being here, I am so aware. I just had a conversation with a gentleman recently. He's based in Germany. And then I realized when we first got on the call, and he said hello. And I just, yeah, I thanked him. Like, I appreciate his willingness and, yeah, ability to have our meeting in English because my German sucks. And it's just, yeah, this awareness piece about, yeah, the different cultures, the cultures, and then the languages, and realizing that for a lot of people, English is their second, third, fourth language. So now you're trying to communicate, and it's really interesting. So it's and it's similar to at home. My wife is always telling me to. It's like, what did you just say? Can you say that differently? Can you say that in English? She says. It's like, can you use a different word for that? And so it helps me to realize it's like the just it's like the purpose of language. This might sound bad, but here it goes. It reminds me, or it makes me feel like in the US, my education was such that your language, vocabulary, your diction really influenced the way people perceived you and how
Mhm.
they would judge you and all of these things.
Your
Uh,
social positioning.
yeah, for sure. Whereas now, in a place that's very multicultural, language is really serves a different purpose. It's actually to communicate.
Yeah. And
So
actually, you need
it's,
to forget all your high words or very, very business oriented and words and go to basic words to make sure
yeah,
you understood.
yeah, that's what she's always telling me. Can you say that in a different way? Like, oh, yeah. So now this is happening more as I'm speaking more and more to people who have, English as a second, third, or fourth language. It's making me really think about the way I speak and the analogies I use, the idioms that I use, and the speed with which I speak. And then one other part of the American experience and the self-awareness I think that happens being an international is and I learned this in culture training. So when we moved here, I had 8 hours, an 8 hour course of culture training. And this was one of the things that they talked about. But when I first took the course, I hadn't yet seen it or experienced it or anything. But now, yeah, I've become very aware of it. How in any type of group scenario or even in a one-on-one conversation, and this is a generalization based on culture and all of this data and whatnot through this platform that I use, what have you, but it says that Americans tend to fill up the space. So they'll just come in and just go and not really typically have awareness about things like culture or language and whatnot, and therefore not creating enough space or pause for other people who may have different cultures or different languages or whatever, need to think through to then feel like they're able to reply. And so have a tendency just to keep going, and that creates this bigger disconnect, and like everybody, feels like, oh, we're all on the same page, but really these people have no idea because they haven't been able to, it's gone too fast. So
Yes.
that's another interesting piece that I've become I probably took it too far. But I became very aware of, and so therefore I would not speak because I was so aware, like, let me not do that. And so I've been trying to find my way in the happy medium. But then often in, organizations or with companies, they'll say, oh, well, you're American, tell us what you think and go ahead and add your perspective. So I'm like, but I don't want to overdo it. So I'm like trying to find my balance with
I think
this.
it's quite simple to understand, because the moment you are invited, like the example you just gave,
Hmm.
then yes, you have to, you should. That's your moment.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just about sharing and listening in the same amount. So ask question and listen, and
Hmm.
ask questions again to make sure, or at least this is how I apply it, just to make sure I get that right or not. But honestly, I don't think, as we just said, there are so many factors. It's not only that it will be very simple if, okay, I'm Romanian, you're American, and we come to this culture and we just need to adapt to the Dutch culture. But they are also adapting to our culture.
Right.
And they have other nationalities that they are not only their own nationality, but adapted. So I think that for me, the rule is, like I said, defining what are we discussing about, and do we understand the same thing, and then just let's be open and let's really listen. Because otherwise, if we are starting to put too many blockages, we kind of we cancel ourselves basically.
Yeah.
And we end up at the same place that we wanted to avoid, but coming from a good place with a good intention. So the result is the same, because but not the bad intention. I don't think there's a rule, and everyone is so different. And you can have maybe you can have a Dutch person that you expect to plan in advance, but they are super last moment everything and open. Or you can have an American that will be the opposite and everything,
Right. Of course.
So you never know. So this way, I think the important thing is just be present in that discussion and just follow your gut feeling, and you navigate it from there.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. I love the part about questions, because I'm asking questions all the time and also trying to kind of assimilate here. I'm constantly asking questions about why they do what they do, so that I can try to understand the thought process and see what, sometimes just the individual person, but sometimes it's like, oh, and oftentimes when you ask questions, I don't know if you probably have this experience too. It's like when somebody asks you a question, it makes you think about, why do we do this? I don't know why we do this. We just do it this way. So it really can push you to start to even question things, which is sometimes jarring, but it's actually quite great. So this, I know anybody who's in a multicultural like relationship, this bit, because this happens. Like, you do what? It's like the stories, like, is that real? Like, what? Why do you do that? So this is what I'm doing here as well, trying to ask, is there a reason, or how did you feel? I'm trying to ascertain what's going on before just like jumping in and saying things. So I really think that there's a lot of, to put a lot of stock in that bit about asking questions and genuinely being curious, right? So it's like, I think
And
that actually starts, it's like the curious mindset. So if you're open and curious, you're generally going to ask questions.
Exactly. And don't make assumptions.
Right.
Don't make assumptions.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny when we started, like, we have no idea what we're going to talk about, and we
I
ended
know.
up
we freestyled. Look at us.
we start.
Yeah.
Fun.
I know. Super.
I think we can call an end to this episode.
Let's do it. Let's
do that.
Yeah, it's the end of 39. Over and out.
Thank you for listening. Bye.